Lady Margaret grabbed her daughter's wrist so hard, Clara felt the bones press together. "Listen." Her mother's voice was low, precise, surgical. "Tonight you will stand where I tell you to stand. You will smile when I tell you to smile. And when the Duke looks across that room, and you will step aside for Eleanor. Do you understand me?" Clara stared at her. "She is your niece. I am your daughter." "Yes." Lady Margaret released her wrist. "And that is exactly why I am telling you the truth." She walked away without looking back. If this story hit something deep in you, subscribe right now, drop your city in the comments, and let me see how far this story travels. Clara stood in the hallway of the Harrington estate and did not move for a full 30 seconds after her mother walked away. Not because she was stunned. She was not stunned. She had heard variations of those words her entire life. Softened, sometimes. Sometimes not softened at all, always carrying the same essential message. You are here, Clara, but you are not the point. What kept her still was something quieter and more dangerous than shock. It was the moment she decided she was done pretending it didn't hurt. She straightened her gloves. She lifted her chin. She walked through the doors into the ballroom alone. And that was where the night truly began. The room was already full when she entered, full of sound, full of light, full of the particular social energy that came from 100 people performing their best versions of themselves simultaneously. She felt it the moment she stepped inside, that invisible pressure, the sense of being evaluated before anyone had even looked directly at her. She was used to it. She walked to the far side of the room, found a position near the tall windows, and stood there with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent years becoming fluent in the language of invisibility. Her cousin Beatrice found her within 3 minutes. "You are doing it again," Beatrice said, appearing at her elbow with a glass of punch, and the expression of someone who had been searching longer than 3 minutes and did not want to admit it. "Standing," Clara said, disappearing. Beatrice pressed the glass into her hand. "Clara, your mother is already moving Eleanor toward the Harrington sons. You have maybe 20 minutes before she remembers you exist and relocates you somewhere worse. Behind the fern. She put you behind the fern last time as a warning. Tonight she'll put you in the servants' corridor." Clara almost smiled. Almost. "B," she said quietly. "She told me to step aside. Tonight specifically. She used those exact words." Beatrice went still. It was the kind of stillness that happened when something you had suspected for a long time was finally said out loud, and the saying of it made it real in a way the suspecting never quite had. "She said that to you," Beatrice repeated. "In those words." She held my wrist while she said it, in case the words weren't clear enough. Beatrice's jaw tightened. She was a gentle woman by nature, softer than Clara, in most ways quicker to find the charitable interpretation of a person's behavior. But she had 2 daughters of her own, and something moved across her face that was neither gentle nor soft. "She had no right," Beatrice said. "She believes she had every right." Clara took a small sip of punch. "She believes she is being practical, realistic. She believes she is doing me a kindness by preparing me for the truth before life delivers it less gently. That is not kindness. That is cruelty with good posture." "Yes," Clara said simply. "I know." They stood together for a moment, the noise of the room pressing in around them, laughter lifting and falling in waves, the distant sound of the orchestra tuning in the adjoining hall. Then Beatrice said, "He's coming tonight, Ravenshire." Clara looked at her. Lady Harrington confirmed it, 3 times. Apparently, she stopped believing it herself by the second confirmation. Beatrice lowered her voice. "Every family with a daughter in this room has been informed. Your mother knows. That is almost certainly why she..." She stopped. "Why she needed Eleanor positioned correctly," Clara finished for her. "Yes, I had the same thought." The orchestra began properly. Then, the opening notes rising through the connecting doors, and the room shifted, people moving toward the ballroom in the subtle collective drift of a crowd following a tide. Clara didn't move. "You should come in," Beatrice said. "I will, in a moment." Beatrice hesitated, looked at her with that expression again, the one that saw too clearly and found the seeing painful, and then squeezed her arm and moved with the crowd. Clara stayed at the window. She thought about the wrist, the precise, deliberate pressure of it. Her mother had not grabbed her in anger. Lady Margaret Whitmore did not do things in anger. She found anger inefficient. She had held Clara's wrist the way a person holds a door closed, firmly, with intention. Step aside for Eleanor. Clara had been stepping aside for Eleanor for 6 years. Eleanor, who was beautiful, and knew it with the relaxed confidence of someone who had always been told so. Eleanor, who said charming things at precisely the right moment, and laughed in a way that made rooms feel warmer. Eleanor, who was 22 and already had 3 serious suitors, and a collection of letters from a 4th who lived in Edinburgh and wrote by all accounts extraordinarily well. Clara did not resent Eleanor. She had examined that particular question carefully over the years, turning it over the way you turn over a stone to see what lives beneath it, and what she found was not resentment. Eleanor was not cruel. She had never once said a single unkind word to Clara. She had simply existed brilliantly and effortlessly in the exact space that Clara's mother had decided mattered most, and Clara had been required quietly and consistently to exist around her. That was the thing about being the daughter. Nobody expected to be loved. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. There was no single terrible moment you could point to and say, there, that was when it happened, that was when I understood. It was 1,000 small moments, 1,000 quiet redirections. 1,000 times someone adjusted who was standing in the center of a room, and the adjustment was so natural, so practiced, that it barely registered as a choice at all. Until one night, your mother held your wrist and said the quiet part in plain words, and then you understood that it had always been a choice. Every single time. Clara set her empty glass on the nearest surface and walked into the ballroom. She was not going to stand at the window tonight. The ballroom was everything it was designed to be: loud and bright and full of the specific social theater that the English upper class had refined over generations into something that looked effortless and was in fact exhausting. Clara moved through the outer edge of it along the wall, not hiding, but not inserting herself, either watching the choreography of it with the detached attention of someone who had spent enough years observing to read the patterns clearly. She could see her mother across the room, positioned near the Harrington family, with Eleanor beside her, the two of them arranged with the kind of casual perfection that was anything but casual. Lady Margaret was speaking to Lord Harrington's eldest son, her posture open and welcoming. Eleanor contributing precisely timed smiles at precisely the right moments. A performance. A very good one. Clara turned away from it. She found a position near the side of the room, not behind anything, not hidden, simply slightly apart from the main current of movement, and stood there and let herself breathe. That was when she heard the room change. She felt it before she heard it, the way you feel a weather shift before the sky actually darkens. A subtle alteration in the texture of the noise. Conversations interrupting themselves. A ripple of redirected attention moving from the entrance across the room like a stone dropped in water. She looked toward the main doors. And there he was. She had expected what had she expected? Something like the descriptions. Something designed to impress. The military bearing the aristocratic authority. The particular combination of wealth and power and consequence that London society applied to a man like Adrian Blackwood, like a coat of paint so thick and thorough that it was often difficult to see what was underneath. What she had not expected was how tired he looked. It was subtle. It was the kind of tired that people with his particular training and his particular upbringing learned early to conceal behind correct posture and controlled expression. But Clara had spent years reading the details that other people missed, and she read it clearly. The way his jaw was set too carefully. The way his eyes moved across the room with the systematic scan of someone assessing a situation for exits and threats before they assessed it for opportunity. The way he accepted the greetings directed at him, and there were many immediately people converging like a tide with perfect politeness and zero warmth. The handshakes and nods of a man who had been performing for an audience for so long that the performance had become indistinguishable from the person, except it hadn't. Not quite. Clara watched him work through the first wave of introductions and reintroductions and carefully angled conversations, and she watched the moment, brief, quickly controlled, when something flickered behind his eyes that was not cold at all. It was exhausted. Profoundly, specifically, personally exhausted. She recognized it because she felt something similar most evenings in rooms like this one for entirely different reasons. She turned away. It was none of her business. The Duke of Ravenshire was surrounded by people whose entire purpose tonight was to make themselves his business, and he would navigate that with whatever reserves of patience and performance he had available. And by morning, there would be 3 new roomers, and at least 2 mothers convinced their daughter had made a significant impression, and none of it had anything to do with Clara Whitmore. She looked around for Beatrice. "You're not going to try?" The voice came from her left. She turned. A woman she knew slightly, Mrs. Ashford, wife of a minor baronet, was watching her with the particular expression of someone who had been observing Clara observe the Duke and found the whole sequence interesting. "I beg your pardon," Clara said. "Every woman in this room is trying to position herself for an introduction. You watched him for 30 seconds and then looked away." Mrs. Ashford tilted her head. "I'm simply curious. I don't believe staring constitutes an introduction strategy," Clara said. "In this room, it's often the first step." Mrs. Ashford smiled slightly. "Your mother is over there, 3rd position from the Harrington pillar. She's been watching you for the last 2 minutes. Clara did not look. She already knew her mother was watching. She could feel it the way she had always been able to feel it, that particular quality of attention that was not warm and not cold, but purely assessing the way a shopkeeper assesses inventory. "Let her watch," Clara said. Mrs. Ashford raised her eyebrows very slightly and moved on. Clara reached out to the nearest surface for something to hold a glass of water. It turned out from a passing tray and stood with it, and did not look at her mother, and did not look at the Duke, and breathed evenly, and thought about the garden outside the window, and thought about the morning, and thought about the fact that there was a book on her nightstand at home that she was 3 chapters from finishing. She was thinking about the book when she heard her name. Miss Whitmore, not from across the room, not shouted, said quietly, directly from approximately 4 feet away. She turned. Adrian Blackwood was standing in front of her, not moving toward her. Already arrived, already stopped, already looking at her with an expression she could not immediately classify, because it contained nothing she expected. No social performance, no calculated charm, no careful assessment of her as a potential candidate for something. He was simply looking at her, the way a person looks at another person when they have stopped doing everything else for a moment. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was genuinely surprised by this. "You have been standing in roughly the same position," he said, "for the last 20 minutes. "I have been standing in various positions," she said carefully. "This is the current one. And before this room you were standing by the window in the entrance hall." She looked at him. "You noticed that?" "I notice things." He paused. "Why are you standing alone?" It was such a direct question that for a moment she simply experienced it without answering the directness of it, the absence of social cushioning around it. The fact that he had asked it the way someone asks a question they actually want answered, rather than a question they are asking because it is the correct next line in a script. "Because nobody chooses the woman standing alone," she said. She said it plainly, without self-pity. Simply as a fact, stated in the same register in which he had asked the question. Something moved in his expression. Brief. Real. "Perhaps," he said, "nobody has looked carefully enough." And before she had fully processed those words, before she had decided what they meant, or what response they warranted, or whether they were genuine or simply the most sophisticated opening line she had ever encountered, he extended his hand. "Dance with me, Miss Whitmore." Not a request, not quite, but not the command it might have been either. It was something in between, an offering maybe, from a man who did not look as though he offered things often. Clara looked at his hand. She was aware with a clarity that was almost physical that her mother was watching from across the room. She was aware that every person in their immediate vicinity had stopped their own conversations. She was aware that this moment, a Duke crossed ballroom extended hand. A woman standing alone was the kind of moment that London society would discuss for weeks. She was aware of all of it, and she took his hand. "Very well, Your Grace," she said. His hand closed around hers, and across the room she actually heard, faint and distant, but completely distinct, her mother's sharp intake of breath. Clara looked straight ahead and let the Duke of Ravenshire lead her onto the floor. They danced. It was not what she expected. She had danced with men before. Not many, not often, but enough to know the range of ways a man could hold a woman during a waltz and what those ways communicated. There were men who held you like furniture. They were required to move carefully. Men who held you like a prize they were temporarily displaying. Men who held you like they were thinking about someone else. Adrian held her like she was a person. Firmly enough to lead. Lightly enough to leave space. They were 3 measures in before he spoke. "How long have you been attending these events?" he asked. 6 years, she said. "Since my debut season." "And in 6 years, you have developed a preference for windows." "I have developed a preference for honesty," she said. "Windows are simply where I go when the alternative becomes overwhelming." He looked at her. They were close enough now that she could see the specific quality of his attention, focused, genuinely focused the way military men focused. She thought when they had decided a thing deserved their full consideration. "What alternative?" he asked. "Pretending," she said simply. "Pretending to be delighted by conversations that are not delightful. Pretending that the performance matters. Pretending that the performance is the same thing as the person performing it." A pause. "That," he said, "is an unusually direct answer." "You asked an unusually direct question." Another pause. Longer. "Yes," he said. "I did." They completed a full turn in silence. The room moved around them. She was aware of faces tracking them, of whispers beginning their slow circulation, of her mother, somewhere in her peripheral vision, in a state she could only imagine. "May I ask you something?" Clara said. "You may." "Why me?" "You could have spoken to any woman in this room. Several of them have been maneuvering for exactly that opportunity all evening. Why did you cross the room to speak to the woman by the window?" He considered this. Not long it was clear he had already considered it, that the answer was available, but he took a moment before he gave it to her, and she had the impression he was deciding how honest to be. He chose honest. "Because," he said, "you were the only person in the room who looked at me and did not want something." She absorbed that. "Everyone wants something from a duke," he continued. His voice was even matter-of-fact, but beneath the evenness, there was something that had been compressed for a long time. A connection, a favor, a ring, a story to tell. "From the moment I walked through those doors, every person in this room has been calculating. I am very accustomed to being calculated." "And I was not calculating," she said. "You were watching me the way a person watches something they find curious, not something they intend to acquire." He paused. "It has been a considerable time since anyone looked at me that way." Clara thought about what she had seen when he walked in. The tiredness, the systematic scan of the room, the performance of warmth over the absence of it. "You are exhausted," she said. He missed half a step. Only half. He recovered immediately. But she felt it, the slight break in the precision of the movement, the fraction of a second where the control slipped. "I beg your pardon," he said. "You are exhausted," she repeated. Not unkindly. Not tired. Exhausted. There is a difference. Tired is what happens after a long day. Exhausted is what happens after a long several years, I would imagine in your case. He looked at her. The music continued. They continued with it. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly, "you have known me for approximately 4 minutes. "Yes," she agreed. "But you asked me why I prefer honesty. That is why. Because 4 minutes of honest attention reveals more than 4 years of polished performance." The music began to slow toward its conclusion. "You are," he said, and his voice was different now, quieter, stripped of something more unguarded. "Not at all what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I did not expect you specifically. I did not come tonight with expectations." He paused. That may have been a strategic error. The final notes resolved. They stopped. He released her hand, but not immediately. A half-second longer than convention required. She noticed it. She suspected he was aware she noticed it. Around them, the room had reconstituted itself into the appearance of normal activity. But she could feel the attention, the weight of 100 people pretending not to watch while watching with complete dedication. He bowed. She curtsied. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore," he said. "Thank you, Your Grace." He looked at her for one more moment. "I wonder," he said very quietly, almost to himself, "if you would consider a walk in the garden tomorrow. Lady Harrington is hosting a luncheon. I have been informed I am expected to attend." Clara looked at him steadily. "I have also been informed I am expected to attend," she said. "Then perhaps," he said, "we will both be expected at the garden." He inclined his head and moved away. Clara stood in the center of the floor and breathed. Then she became aware of something approaching from her left, with the speed and singular focus of something that had been building pressure for the last 20 minutes and had finally identified a direction. She turned. Her mother stopped 2 feet in front of her. Lady Margaret Whitmore's face was a controlled landscape of competing requirements: the social requirement to appear pleasant, the personal requirement to communicate something considerably less pleasant, and the architectural requirement to hold both simultaneously without letting either collapse the other. "Well," her mother said. "Good evening, Mother," Clara said. "Do not," Lady Margaret said quietly. "Do not be clever with me right now. Not tonight." "I danced," Clara said. "I did not arrange it. He came to me. I am aware of what he did." Her mother's voice was very low. "I am standing in a room of 200 people, and I watched it as did everyone else." "Then you know exactly what happened. I have nothing to add. Clara." Her mother stepped closer, dropping her voice further. "Do you understand what this is? What tonight could mean? This is not a game. This is the Duke of Ravenshire, a man with a title, an estate of fortune, and a requirement for a duchess. This was one dance, Mother. One dance from that man," Lady Margaret said, "is worth 10 engagements from anyone else. And if you ruin this—" "I will not ruin anything," Clara said. "But I will also not manage it. I will not calculate it. I will not perform my way through a garden walk tomorrow and pretend to be something I am not, because you believe that is what he requires." Her mother stared at her. "He came to me," Clara said again, more quietly now. "He looked across a room full of beautiful, brilliant, perfectly positioned women, and he crossed it to speak to me. Do you not want to wonder why?" Lady Margaret had no answer for that. Or she had an answer, and it was one she was not prepared to say in the middle of the Harrington ballroom. "We will discuss this at home," she said finally. "Yes," Clara agreed. "We will." Her mother turned and walked back toward Eleanor and the Harrington sons and the careful architecture of the evening as she had planned it. Clara turned back toward the room, across it. She could see Adrian Blackwood engaged in a conversation with Lord Harrington, standing precisely as he should, speaking precisely as he should, the performance back in place and flawless. But for 1 second, just one, he glanced across the room and found her immediately without searching, as if he had known exactly where she was. Clara held his gaze for 3 seconds and then looked away first. She found Beatrice at the edge of the room 20 feet away, staring at her with an expression of complete astonishment. Clara walked toward her. "Don't," Clara said before Beatrice could speak. "I haven't said anything," Beatrice managed. "You are about to say 6 things simultaneously." "Clara." Beatrice grabbed her arm. "He danced with you. Adrian Blackwood danced with you, and then he did. He asked you something. At the end I could see him say something else. What did he say?" "He mentioned the garden luncheon tomorrow." Beatrice stared at her. "Clara Whitmore." "Yes." "Do you understand?" "Yes," Clara said. "I do." "Your mother is going to—" "I know." "And Eleanor." "I know B." Beatrice looked at her for a long moment. Then very quietly, "Are you all right?" And it was that question, not the astonishment, not the implications, not the social mathematics of the evening. It was that question that almost undid her, because nobody had asked her that in a very long time. Yes, she said, and she meant it and didn't mean it in equal measure. Ask me again tomorrow, after the garden. Beatrice squeezed her arm. Clara stood beside her cousin in the bright, noisy room and thought about a man who had walked across a ballroom when he could have stood still. She thought about the half-second he had held her hand. She thought about his voice when he said, "Perhaps nobody has looked carefully enough." She thought about her mother's hand on her wrist. Step aside for Eleanor, she thought. No, not tonight, not anymore. Something had shifted inside her that evening, not loudly, not dramatically, not with the crash and thunder of revelation. Quietly, precisely. The way a lock turns when the right key is finally used. She did not know yet what was on the other side of that door, but she intended to find out. She did not sleep well that night. This was not unusual for Clara. Sleep had always come to her like a reluctant guest arriving late and leaving early, and she had long since made peace with the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the house was completely still, and her mind was completely not. But that particular night, the sleeplessness had a different texture than normal. It was not the anxious circular kind, the kind that chased the same thought around the same track, without ever resolving anything. It was more alert than that, more awake in the truest sense of the word. She lay in the dark and thought about a man who had walked across a room. She thought about the way she thought about problems that interested her, not emotionally, or not only emotionally, but analytically, turning the pieces of it over and examining each one separately. The fact of the crossing itself, the specific words he had chosen, the half-second he had held her hand, the way he had found her across the room without searching. She thought about what Beatrice had said. She thought about what her mother had said. She thought most precisely and most carefully about what he had said. Perhaps nobody has looked carefully enough. It was the kind of line that could mean many things. She was aware of that. She was aware that a man in his position with his intelligence was perfectly capable of deploying exactly the right words for exactly the right effect. She was aware that she was not the first woman to find herself replaying a conversation with Adrian Blackwood and constructing significance from it. She was aware of all of this, and yet she kept returning to his face in the moment she had said, "You are exhausted." The half-step he had missed, the way the control had slipped for just that fraction of a second. You could not perform that. She was quite certain of it. You could perform recovery from surprise, but you could not perform the surprise itself, not with that specific quality of exposure, the expression of a person who has been seen in a way they did not anticipate and did not entirely know how to manage. He had been surprised that she saw him, which meant he was not accustomed to being seen, which meant she thought staring at the ceiling in the dark that tonight had been real in at least that one specific way. She fell asleep sometime around 4 and woke at 7 to the sound of her mother's voice in the hallway, not speaking to her. Speaking to the housekeeper. Mrs. Fenn, with the clipped, precise efficiency of a woman who had decided what the day required and was already several steps into executing it. Clara lay still and listened to the familiar rhythm of her mother's early morning management of the household, and felt, as she had felt many mornings, the particular weight of living inside someone else's careful order. She got up dressed without ringing for the maid. She had always preferred to manage that herself, a preference her mother considered both unnecessary and subtly defiant, and went downstairs. Her mother was in the breakfast room, seated at the head of the table, already composed in a way that suggested she had been composed since before she woke up. "Sit down, Clara," she said, without looking up from the letter she was reading. Clara sat. For 2 full minutes, neither of them spoke. The housekeeper brought tea. Clara poured her own. Her mother finished the letter, folded it with the precise alignment of someone for whom small physical orderliness was both habit and communication, and set it aside. Then she looked at Clara. "I have been thinking," Lady Margaret said, "about last night." "As have I," Clara said. "I spoke harshly to you in the hallway, before the ball." A pause. "That was not well done of me." Clara looked at her mother. In 26 years, she could count on one hand the number of times Lady Margaret Whitmore had offered anything in the vicinity of an apology. The words were precise and minimal, and contained no actual acknowledgement of what had been said, but they were more than Clara had generally received, and she recognized them for what they were. "Thank you," she said carefully. "However," her mother continued, and there it was, the pivot Clara had been waiting for. "I must be direct with you about the situation as it now stands. Because of what happened last night, there are expectations in motion that cannot simply be ignored." Whose expectations? Everyone's. Her mother set down her teacup. When the Duke of Ravenshire singles out a woman at a public event, singles her out, crosses a room, dances with her, and is then seen speaking to her privately, society begins to draw conclusions. Those conclusions create pressure. And that pressure, she said, looking at Clara steadily, will fall primarily on you. Clara held her mother's gaze. In what form? Scrutiny. The kind you have not previously been subject to because previously you were not a person of interest. Women who were watching last night, and they were all watching, will now be watching you with a very different quality of attention. They will be looking for reasons. Reasons for what? Reasons why you. Her mother's voice was even clinical. Reasons why a man like that, with every option available to him, chose to look at you. And when they cannot find satisfactory reasons, and they will not find them, because society does not accept, she was standing by the window, as an adequate explanation, they will begin to construct their own. Clara was quiet for a moment. "You are warning me," she said slowly. "Or you are warning me off." "I am preparing you," her mother said. "Because whatever you believe about last night, and whatever illusions you may have allowed yourself during the sleepless hours, the reality of the morning is this: he is a duke. He needs a wife who can stand beside that title without the entire city whispering about the peculiarity of the match. You believe I cannot stand beside that title. I believe," Lady Margaret said precisely, "that you have never given society adequate reason to believe you can. And society's belief matters. It is not fair. It is simply true." Clara set her teacup down. "He asked me to walk in the garden today," she said. "At Lady Harrington's luncheon." Her mother already knew this. Clara could see that she already knew. Someone had told her, or she had seen, or she had simply understood from the quality of that final exchange across the ballroom. Lady Margaret Whitmore missed very little. "I know," she said. "And you would like me to be there. I would like you," her mother said carefully, "to conduct yourself in a way that does not embarrass this family, or give him reason to question his interest before it has had an opportunity to develop properly. You want me to behave. I want you to be strategic. Those are not the same thing." "Clara, he came to me because I was not performing," Clara said. "He said as much. He said I was the only person in that room who was not calculating something. If I walk into that garden today and become a calculating person, then I become exactly what he crossed the room to avoid. Do you understand that?" Her mother looked at her. It was a long look. The kind that contained several things at once: assessment, consideration, and somewhere beneath both of those, something Clara could not quite name. Something that was not pride and was not warmth, but was perhaps adjacent to both in the way that planets are adjacent to suns, without being suns themselves. "Yes," her mother said finally. "I understand it. Then let me go to the garden and be myself." "Your version of yourself," Lady Margaret said quietly, "has spent 6 years invisible in ballrooms, Clara. I simply want to be certain you understand the stakes." "I understand them perfectly." Clara pushed back her chair and stood. "I have understood them for 6 years. I simply chose last night to stop letting them choose for me." She left the breakfast room before her mother could respond. The Harrington luncheon was hosted in the formal gardens behind the estate, a sprawling, carefully arranged space that Lady Harrington tended to, with the dedication that some women gave to charitable causes and others gave to their children. Round tables had been arranged across the lawn, white-clothed and precisely appointed, and perhaps 40 guests moved between them in the easy dispersed way of people for whom outdoor entertaining in mild spring weather was a natural and practiced pleasure. Clara arrived with her mother and Eleanor. She had spent the carriage ride in silence, watching the streets pass and thinking about nothing. She was willing to examine too closely. Eleanor beside her had said nothing about the previous night. She had not in fact said anything about the Duke at all, and the absence of the subject was its own kind of statement. Clara looked at her cousin's profile, the careful blankness of it, the deliberate neutrality, and thought, she knows, and she is being gracious, and I am not certain whether to be grateful or more unsettled. The luncheon was well underway when the Duke arrived. How was not late precisely. He arrived within the acceptable margin, but he arrived after most of the guests had settled, which meant that his entrance was noted and his passage through the garden tracked by a dozen pairs of eyes made casual by practice. Clara was standing near the edge of the garden speaking with Beatrice and a woman she knew slightly, Mrs. Pemberton, whose husband was involved in something financial that Clara had never found sufficiently interesting to retain. She was listening to Mrs. Pemberton describe a recent visit to Bath and doing her best to contribute the appropriate small sounds of attention when she became aware with the same particular quality of awareness she had felt the previous night that someone had shifted the atmosphere. She looked up. He was 20 feet away. He had not looked at her yet. He was speaking with Lord Harrington standing correctly, a glass in his hand, and to all appearances engaged in exactly the kind of conversation the setting required. But she had the absolute conviction, the same conviction she had had across the ballroom the night before, that he was aware of precisely where she was. "He's here," Beatrice said extremely quietly into her ear. "Yes," Clara said. "I noticed. He has not looked at you yet." "No. He will. Be, please. He's going to look in approximately 10 seconds, and when he does, you need to not look away immediately like you did last night, because last night you looked away first, and that was a missed. Beatrice, I am simply providing tactical support." "I do not want tactical support. I want you to stop counting." Beatrice stopped counting aloud. Clara could tell she continued counting internally. Mrs. Pemberton, who had been describing Bath throughout this entire exchange, with admirable dedication, paused and said pleasantly, "Oh, is the Duke here?" "Apparently," Clara said. "What a remarkable thing last night," Mrs. Pemberton said in the comfortable tone of someone who had been waiting to raise this subject since the moment she identified Clara. "Everyone was talking about it this morning. Lord Ashby said he had never in 20 years seen Ravenshire single a woman out like that. Usually he is so—" She made a vague gesture, contained. "He was simply being polite," Clara said. Mrs. Pemberton looked at her with the kindly patience of someone who has heard an obvious inaccuracy stated in good faith. "My dear, contained men who are simply being polite do not cross entire ballrooms. They nod from a distance and allow their secretaries to handle introductions. That was not politeness." She smiled. "That was intention." Clara opened her mouth to respond to this. "Miss Whitmore." She closed her mouth. Howe was standing 6 feet away, and he had moved there with the same quality of quiet directness that she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through spaces. Not dramatically, not with announcement, but with absolute purposefulness, as though between any 2 points in his world, there was only the shortest line, and he walked it. "Your Grace," she said, "I had hoped to find you here." "Then you have succeeded," she said. The slight shift in his expression, almost nothing, almost a smile, was brief and real, and somehow more communicative than a full smile from most people. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "Lady Harrington has apparently arranged some particular section of the garden that guests are encouraged to admire. I find I would prefer to admire it with a direction." Beside her, Clara felt Beatrice achieve a stillness that was almost supernatural in its intensity. "Of course," Clara said. They walked. The garden path took them away from the main cluster of guests through a section of carefully arranged plantings toward a low stone bench near a tall hedge. The voices of the luncheon became quieter behind them as they moved, not gone, but reduced to a pleasant, indistinct texture. For 2 minutes they walked without speaking. She noticed he did not rush the silence. He occupied it the same way he occupied rooms with presence without demand. "How did you sleep?" he asked. She glanced at him. "Not particularly well." "No," he said. "Neither did I." "What kept you awake?" A pause. "Thought," he said simply. And you? The same. She paused. I spent a portion of it questioning whether last night was as unusual as it felt, or whether I was assigning significance to something ordinary. And what did you conclude? I concluded, she said, that I had insufficient information to draw a reliable conclusion. He made a sound that might in a less controlled man have been a laugh. A reasonable position. I thought so. They reached the bench. He stopped, and she stopped with him, and they stood there in the relative quiet of the garden's far section, and Clara felt the shift from the performance of the luncheon behind them to something that felt considerably more real. May I tell you something, he said, that I did not intend to tell anyone for some time. She looked at him fully. Yes, the estate is in a more serious condition than the public accounts suggest. He said it evenly, without apparent embarrassment, in the manner of a man who had made a decision to be direct and was following it through regardless of discomfort. My father's management in the final years was not what it should have been. There are debts. There are relationships with the tenants and villages that need to be rebuilt. There is significant work ahead. Clara absorbed this. Why are you telling me this? Because every family in that room, he said, tilting his head toward the distant sound of the luncheon, is responding to the idea of the title, the fortune, the name. I need someone who understands that the reality of the title is work. Complicated, unglamorous, relentless work. And I find I cannot spend another evening performing my way through introductions and pretending I am something simpler than I am. She was quiet for a moment. You are telling me, she said slowly, that you are not simply choosing a duchess. You are looking for a partner. Yes. And last night you decided in the course of one dance that I might be a candidate for that. Last night, he said, I decided you were the only honest person in the room. Whether that translates to anything further is precisely what I am attempting to determine. He paused. With your permission. Clara looked at him. She thought about her mother's voice this morning. The wrist in the hallway last night. 6 years of standing near walls and windows and bookshelves. 6 years of being the woman nobody expected to be chosen, and then not being chosen and making peace with that, or believing she had made peace with it, and understanding this morning in the sleepless hours that she had not quite, not fully. There was still something in her that had continued to hope in the careful private way of things you do not examine too closely, because the examining itself is a kind of risk. You are very direct, she said. I have found indirection wastes time I do not have. And if I told you that I have spent 6 years being considered an unusual woman, too honest, too interested in the wrong things, too unwilling to be what society preferred, and that I have no intention of changing that, then I would tell you, he said, meeting her gaze with the absolute steadiness of someone who had survived things that required steadiness. That unusual is precisely what I came looking for. I simply did not know it until I saw you by the window. Clara was quiet. Not because she had nothing to say, because she was making a decision. It happened in the space of 3 seconds. 3 quiet seconds in a garden in April, with the sound of a luncheon 30 yards behind her, and her mother somewhere among those voices, and 6 years of accumulated quiet, and a man standing in front of her, who had twice in 12 hours said something true to her when he had not been required to. Then yes, she said. You have my permission to continue determining. The expression that crossed his face then was brief and unguarded, and she thought she would probably remember it for a very long time. Thank you, Miss Whitmore, he said. They turned and walked back toward the luncheon. They were 15 feet from the main gathering when Isabella Fairmont stepped into their path. Clara had seen Isabella the previous evening. Everyone had seen Isabella because Isabella moved through social spaces in a manner that ensured seeing her was not optional. She was 23, exquisitely dressed, the daughter of one of the oldest families in London, and she possessed the particular confidence of a woman who had been told since infancy that she was exceptional and had found no evidence to contradict this. She stopped in front of them on the path with the deliberateness of someone who had positioned themselves there in advance. Her smile was perfect. Your Grace, she said warmly. How lovely. And Miss Whitmore. The small pause before Clara's name was a masterwork of calibrated social communication. Clara felt it land precisely as it was intended. Miss Fairmont, the Duke said with the exact degree of pleasantness that was required, and no additional degree. "I had hoped to speak with you today," Isabella said to him, making no effort whatsoever to include Clara in the statement. "My father has asked me to extend an invitation to the Fairmont estate for next month, a small party very select. He speaks highly of your family's connection to ours." "How kind of Lord Fairmont," Adrian said. "Please do pass on my regards." "Of course." She let her smile warm, fractionally tilting it in a direction that was clearly calculated to suggest warmth, that was in fact something else entirely. "And perhaps," she added, "we might find an opportunity this afternoon to speak more privately. I find large gatherings rather impersonal. Don't you?" The pause she allowed before the question was an invitation so broad it barely qualified as subtext. Adrian looked at her pleasantly. "I find this afternoon is already rather committed," he said. "But please do give my regards to your father." Isabella's smile did not change. She turned to Clara. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "how unexpected your evening last night. Everyone was quite surprised." "Were they?" Clara said. "Quite. You know how it is when something unusual happens, people naturally wonder about the context." She tilted her head. "We were all simply happy for you, of course. It can be so difficult reaching your particular stage of the season without a real opportunity." She delivered this with such complete warmth and such precise placement that someone listening casually would have heard sympathy. Clara heard every blade in it. She had the brief, vivid thought that Isabella Fairmont was in fact an extraordinarily skilled person, and it was a genuine misfortune that the skill was deployed in this particular direction. "How thoughtful," Clara said mildly. "And how equally unusual to encounter such sincere concern from someone I have spoken with perhaps twice." Isabella blinked. Just once. Beside Clara, she felt rather than saw the Duke make a slight controlled movement that might have been the physical suppression of something. "Of course," Isabella said, recovering immediately. "We must speak more then. Build a proper acquaintance." She refocused on Adrian, restoring the full warmth of her attention to him, like a lamp turning toward a window. "Your Grace, until later." She moved past them back toward the luncheon. Silence. Then the Duke said very quietly, "Impressive." "She is," Clara agreed. "Remarkably so." "I meant your response." Clara glanced at him. "I try not to be unkind." "You were not unkind. You were precise." Another pause. "There is a difference." They resumed walking. The voices of the luncheon grew louder around them, the gathered world of London society, reasserting itself with all its noise and weight and implication. Before they rejoined the group, before the proximity of other people, required the return of appropriate social distance, he said quietly, and without breaking stride. "She will not stop." "I know," Clara said. "Others will join her. Once there is something to talk about, there are always others." He paused. "I need you to know that before anything further develops. Because it will not be easy, and you deserve to make a fully informed decision." Clara considered this. "You are warning me," she said. "Yes. You warned me about the estate this morning. You are warning me about society now." She glanced at him sideways. "You seem to spend considerable energy warning me about difficult things." "Yes," he said again. "Why, a beat." They were almost back at the tables. Almost back into the full visibility of 40 witnesses, who were watching with the dedicated inattention of people trying to appear not to be watching. "Because," he said, "I find I would like you to stay, and I cannot ask you to stay without being honest about what you would be staying for." Clara kept walking. She felt something move through her, not dramatically, not like the novels describe these moments, not like a wave or a crash or an arrival of certainty. More like a door that had been stuck for a long time being opened by someone patient enough to try the handle a second time. She kept her voice even. "I appreciate the honesty," she said, and she sat down at the nearest table and picked up a glass of water and looked out over the gathered luncheon with the composed expression of a woman who had everything under control. While underneath it, in the place she had protected for 6 years, from exactly this kind of hope, something she thought she had finished with, woke up quietly and refused to go back to sleep. Across the table, she met Beatrice's eyes. Beatrice looked at her for 3 seconds. Then she mouthed 2 words silently, with the complete conviction of someone who had watched the last 20 minutes from a distance and reached a conclusion. It's real. Clara looked down at her glass. She thought, I know. The rumors started on a Tuesday. Clara knew this because on Monday she had walked through the market near Whitmore House, and 3 separate acquaintances had greeted her with the normal, unremarkable pleasantness of people who had nothing particular to say to her. And on Tuesday, a woman she had known for 4 years crossed to the other side of the street before Clara could reach her with the careful, deliberate attention to something in the opposite direction that was worse than any open acknowledgement could have been. It was that precise the shift from Monday to Tuesday that told her the whispers had found their shape and begun to move. She said nothing about it at home. Her mother was watching her closely enough already, and Beatrice was visiting her own household across town, and there was nobody in the Whitmore drawing room that afternoon to whom Clara wished to say, I believe London has decided to have an opinion about me, and the opinion is not kind. Instead, she sat with the book she was not reading and thought about the Tuesday woman, and thought about how quickly a thing could travel through a city when the city found it interesting. By Wednesday, she understood the precise shape of what was being said. She understood it because Mrs. Ashford, the same woman who had noticed her watching Adrian at the Harrington ball, who had the particular combination of social access and personal candor that made her simultaneously well-informed and willing to share it, appeared at Whitmore House in the mid-afternoon and asked with careful directness whether Clara was receiving. Clara received her. They sat in the small parlor with tea between them, and Mrs. Ashford looked at her with the expression of someone who has come to deliver something unpleasant and has decided the kindest method is speed. They are saying, Mrs. Ashford said, that you pursued him. Clara set her cup down slowly. I see. That you positioned yourself deliberately. That the window, the separation from the room that it was calculated. A strategy. Mrs. Ashford paused. They are saying you are cleverer than you appear, and they do not mean it as a compliment. No, Clara said. I imagine they don't. There is also a version, Mrs. Ashford continued, that is somewhat more pointed. That you have exaggerated his interest. That the dance was courtesy, and you have constructed something from it that was never intended. Clara was quiet for a moment. Who is saying this? She asked. Mrs. Ashford looked at her steadily. Miss Fairmont has not been ungenerous with her interpretations. Clara absorbed this without surprise. The garden path. The perfect smile. It can be so difficult reaching your particular stage of the season. Isabella Fairmont was efficient, and she was thorough, and she had understood the situation at the Harrington luncheon with the quick, precise intelligence of someone who had a great deal at stake and knew exactly what tools were available. Is there more? Clara asked. There is always more, Mrs. Ashford said, not unkindly. The more is that your mother has spoken to at least 2 people about the Duke's interest in a way that has been received as ambitious, which reflects on you. Clara closed her eyes for 3 seconds, opened them. My mother, she said carefully, is doing what she believes is helpful. I have no doubt of it, but the effect is the same regardless of the intention. Mrs. Ashford leaned forward very slightly. Clara, I am telling you this because I watched you at that ball, and I saw something real. And real things are worth defending. But you cannot defend something you do not know is under attack. Clara looked at this woman, not a close friend, not an ally in any formal sense, simply a person with the courage to deliver truth without decoration, and felt a surge of gratitude that was almost startling in its intensity. Thank you, she said, and she meant it with every part of her. Mrs. Ashford nodded once the nod of a person who has done what they came to do and considers it finished. She finished her tea, stood, and left. Clara sat alone in this parlor and thought about Isabella Fairmont and her mother and Tuesday women who crossed streets and the precise grinding machinery of a society that had decided to have a position on her life. Then she stood up, went to the writing desk in the corner, and wrote a note. She addressed it to the Duke of Ravenshire. She wrote, Your Grace, I have been made aware of certain conversations currently in circulation. I believe you should know their content before we proceed further. I will be at the Pemberton Garden Party on Saturday. If you wish to speak, I will be near the garden entrance at 3 o'clock. If you do not come, I will understand entirely. C.W. She sealed it, gave it to the housekeeper to send, and went back to the book she was not reading. He was there on Saturday at 3 o'clock exactly. She saw him before he reached her, moving through the Pemberton garden with his particular quality of purposeful directness, and she had the thought not for the first time that whatever else was uncertain about this situation, his capacity for showing up when he said he would appear to be absolute. He stopped beside her. "Tell me," he said. No greeting, no preamble, simply the two words direct and ready, she told him. All of it. Mrs. Ashford's visit, the precise content of what was being said. Isabella Fairmont's role in shaping it, her mother's well-intentioned amplifications and their effect. She told it plainly without self-pity, and without editorializing the way she had learned to deliver difficult information at the same speed as ordinary information, because slowing down only extended the pain of the telling. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "None of that is your fault." "I know." "No," she said, "but it is my problem." "It is our problem," he said. "If we are proceeding." She looked at him. "Are we proceeding?" "I am." He met her eyes directly. "The question is whether you are given that I come with this particular climate." "You warned me," she said. "At the luncheon. You said it would not be easy." "Yes. I did not anticipate it would begin quite this quickly." "I did actually," Clara said. "I know this world. I know how fast it moves when it finds something worth moving about." She paused. "What I did not anticipate was Isabella Fairmont's specific efficiency." Something moved through his expression, brief, controlled, and not entirely pleasant. "Miss Fairmont and I have a history," he said. Clara felt something still in her chest. "Oh, her family pursued a match 2 years before I left for the campaigns. My father was not opposed." He said the words evenly, but the evenness itself was a kind of information. "I was more than opposed. We reached an understanding before my departure that was not apparently as clearly understood on both sides as I believed." Clara was quiet. "She believed," he continued, "that time and my return would alter my position. They have not." He looked at Clara directly. "I am telling you this because you deserve the full context. Not because I owe her anything, because I do not. But because you should know what motivates the efficiency you correctly identified." "She wanted you," Clara said, "and she believed she would have you, and then you danced with me." "Yes, and I am the more manageable obstacle," Clara said, not bitterly, simply accurately. "Easier to dismantle than to address the actual refusal." He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that appeared when she said something that landed precisely where he had not expected it. "Yes, precisely." "Well," Clara said, "that is useful information." "Is it? It tells me the attacks will be targeted at my credibility, not my character. Isabella is too intelligent to attack character openly. It creates sympathy for the target. Instead, she will suggest I am not what I appear, that the interest is on my side only, that you are being managed." She paused. "Which means the most effective defense is simply your visible continued interest, because she cannot call you managed to your face." He looked at her for several seconds. "You have thought about this carefully," he said. "I had several days in a book I wasn't reading," she said. That time the sound he made was definitely something close to a laugh. Brief and real, and slightly startled, as though the laugh itself had surprised him. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. They both heard it at the same moment. She felt it land in the air between them with a weight that was disproportionate to its size. The way small things carry disproportionate weight when the context around them has been building for days. He did not correct it, did not retreat into formality. "I would like to call on you formally," he said, "with your mother's knowledge and approval. Not secretly, not quietly, visibly. I want it known that I am calling, and I want it known with my name attached to it, so that no version of this situation requires you to defend the reality of my interest against anyone's alternative interpretation." Clara looked at him steadily. Her heart was doing something irregular that she chose not to examine. "You understand what a formal call means," she said. "What it communicates, the expectations it creates." "I understand exactly what it means," he said. "That is why I am asking rather than assuming." She breathed. "Yes," she said. He said, "You may call." He called on Thursday. He called, correctly arrived at the designated hour, was received by Lady Margaret with the careful, slightly overwhelmed precision of a woman who had spent 30 years preparing for a social moment and found that the actual arrival of it was somehow different from the preparation. He sat in the Whitmore drawing room and drank tea and spoke to her mother about the estate and about the family and about his plans for the coming year, and all the while Clara sat 3 feet away and watched her mother navigate the conversation with the focused alertness of someone trying to perform casually while being very aware that nothing about the situation was casual. For the first 20 minutes, Lady Margaret was flawless. The questions she asked were exactly right, interested, without being probing, informed, without being presumptuous. She had clearly spent the intervening days studying the Ravenshire estate accounts because she referenced them with a precision that briefly surprised even Clara. Then, in the 23rd minute, her mother said, "Of course we had always hoped Clara would find a match suited to her specific qualities. She is not a conventional choice, as I am sure you have observed, but she is deeply capable in her way." The drawing room felt very still. Clara looked at her cup. Adrian said pleasantly, "I have observed that she is exceptionally capable, yes, in ways that are considerably more than conventional." A pause. "I do not find that in her way is a necessary qualification, Lady Margaret." Her mother blinked. It was very small and very fast, but Clara saw it. "Of course," Lady Margaret said. "I simply meant—" "I understood what you meant," Adrian said with the same pleasantness, the pleasantness of a man who had commanded men in extremely difficult circumstances and had learned that warmth and firmness were not mutually exclusive. "And I wanted to be clear before we proceed further in our acquaintance that I find nothing about your daughter that requires an apology." Silence. Clara did not look at her mother. She kept her eyes on her cup and felt something expand in her chest, warm and slightly painful, the way a cramped muscle feels when it is finally released. Her mother said after a moment, "Quite right." And she moved the conversation to something else smoothly, and without acknowledgement, the way Lady Margaret managed most things she could not immediately argue with. After he left, Clara walked her mother through the hallway in silence. At the foot of the stairs, Lady Margaret stopped. "He defended you," she said. She said it quietly, and the quality of the quiet was something Clara had not heard from her before. Not angry quiet or assessing quiet. Something closer to wondering. "Yes," Clara said. Her mother looked at her. "I said things about you," Lady Margaret said slowly, "that a man who was simply using you would have let pass, would have agreed with, would have used himself." She paused. "He did not." "No," Clara said. "He did not." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Clara," she said, and something in the way she said it, without the usual architecture of management around it, without the framing that usually accompanied her mother saying her name, made Clara go completely still. "He sees you," Lady Margaret said. "Doesn't he?" It was not quite a question. "Yes," Clara said. "I believe he does." Her mother looked at her for 3 more seconds, and then she turned and went upstairs without another word. But in those 3 seconds, Clara saw something she had not seen on her mother's face in so long, she had half convinced herself it didn't exist there. Something that looked unmistakably like regret. She stood at the foot of the stairs for a long time. She was still standing there when the knock came at the front door. Not a caller's knock too late in the day for a proper call. An urgent knock, quick and deliberate. The housekeeper opened it, and Clara turned to see Eleanor standing in the doorway. Not composed. Not the Eleanor of ballrooms and luncheons and perfectly timed smiles. Eleanor's hair was partly undone. Her gloves were not on, and her eyes had the particular brightness of someone who had been crying recently and was holding the next set of tears through sheer force of will. "Eleanor," Clara said, crossing the hall. "What's happened?" Eleanor came inside, and the housekeeper discreetly disappeared, and they stood in the hallway together, and Eleanor said in a voice kept very controlled by visible effort, "I heard what he said to your mother this afternoon." Clara stared at her. "How?" "Mrs. Fenn told the kitchen, and I was in the garden." Eleanor pressed her hands together. "Clara, I need to tell you something. And I need you to believe that I am telling it to you, because it is the right thing to do, not because of any other reason." "Tell me," Clara said. "Isabella Fairmont came to see me 3 days ago." Eleanor's voice was steady now, with the specific steadiness of someone who has made a difficult decision and is following it through. "She told me she suggested that I should say certain things to certain people about the nature of your relationship with the Duke. She said it would benefit both of us, that with you removed from consideration, there would be more opportunity for—" She stopped, looking at her hands. "She wanted me to spread the story that you had confided the whole thing was one-sided, that you had said yourself he was only being polite and you had misread it." The hallway was very quiet. "She wanted you to say I had said that," Clara repeated. "Yes." "And did you—" Eleanor looked up, directly, without flinching. "No." Clara looked at her cousin. This woman, she had spent 6 years standing behind this woman whose effortless loveliness had so consistently occupied the spaces Clara could not reach, and she saw with the sudden clarity of someone seeing a thing they should perhaps have seen earlier that Eleanor had been standing in those spaces without choosing them, had been positioned there by the same hand that had positioned Clara away from them, had been in her own way as managed and directed and used as Clara had been, simply with prettier words around it. "Eleanor," she said. "I told her no," Eleanor said with a fierceness that was new and real and slightly desperate. "I told her I would not say a word against you, and she said—" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "She said you would never last in his world anyway because you don't know how to be what that world requires. That he would tire of the novelty, and she would be there when he did, and anyone who had helped you in the interim would simply look foolish." The fury that moved through Clara was not loud. It was the cold, quiet kind, the kind that comes from a place beneath emotion into something that feels more like resolve. "Thank you," Clara said, "for telling me. I should have told you sooner." Eleanor looked at her with the eyes that had been on the edge of tears at the door, steadier now, but still raw. "I have let you be placed behind me for 6 years, and I have never once said I never—" She stopped. "You didn't do that," Clara said quietly. "That was done to both of us." Eleanor stared at her. "She used you," Clara said, "and she meant her mother, and she meant Isabella Fairmont, and she meant the entire social structure that had arranged people according to its own requirements and called the arrangement natural. And she used me, in different ways, with different words, but the same essential motion." Eleanor pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. Then she said in a slightly unsteady voice, "What are you going to do?" Clara considered this. She thought about Isabella Fairmont constructing her careful architecture of rumors. She thought about a woman who had believed for 2 years that time and patience would bring her what she had decided was hers, and who now found a woman she had always been able to overlook standing in the way. She thought about the efficiency of the attacks and the intelligence behind them, and the specific vulnerability they were aimed at. Not Clara's character, but her credibility, her reality. The truth of what had passed between herself and a man who was right now in a carriage somewhere between Whitmore House and Ravenshire, having just told her mother that Clara required no apology. "Nothing dramatic," Clara said. "She expects drama. She has positioned herself to respond to drama." A pause. "I am going to continue being exactly myself, and I am going to let him continue being exactly what he is. And I am going to trust that the truth is more durable than the most skillfully constructed alternative." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "That is either very wise or very brave." "I think," Clara said quietly, "that at a certain point those are the same thing." Eleanor left an hour later. Clara went upstairs. She sat at her writing desk and did not write anything. She sat with her hands folded and her thoughts moving quickly, and her heart doing the thing it had been doing since the Thursday afternoon hallway where her mother had said, "He sees you," doesn't he?" in the voice of a woman who understood perhaps for the first time what seeing someone actually meant. The letter arrived the next morning. Not from Adrian. From Isabella Fairmont. Brief. Handwritten. Perfect penmanship. Dear Miss Whitmore, I believe we have gotten off to an unfortunate start. I wonder if you might join me for tea on Monday. I find these misunderstandings are so much better resolved in person, don't you? If. Clara read it twice. She thought this is not a peace offering. She thought this is reconnaissance. She thought she wants to know how much I know, and whether I can be managed, and whether there is any version of this situation that she can still control. Clara set the letter down. She picked up her pen. She wrote, Dear Miss Fairmont, thank you for your kind invitation. I will be happy to join you for tea on Monday. C.W. She sealed it and sent it before she could reconsider, because here was what Clara Whitmore understood, sitting at her writing desk, with her blood running calm, and her mind running clear, and 6 years of standing at the edge of rooms behind her. The greatest danger in this situation was not Isabella Fairmont's cruelty. It was her own fear. The fear that her mother had been right, that she was not enough, that the thing that had grown between herself and Adrian in the space of less than 2 weeks was too fragile to withstand the weight of a world that had already decided its position. That fear was the weapon. The rumors were just the delivery mechanism, and she had decided somewhere between Monday and Thursday, between a Tuesday woman crossing a street and a man saying her name for the first time in a garden, that she was finished being afraid. She was going to Monday tea. She was going to sit across from Isabella Fairmont and be entirely, completely, and unapologetically herself. And if that was not enough, then she would deal with that reality when it arrived. But she was not going to step aside. Not this time. Not again. Monday came the way. Difficult things always came preceded by a night that was too long, and a morning that moved too fast. Clara dressed without the maid again. She had woken at 5 and lain in the dark for 2 hours running through conversations that had not happened yet, which she recognized as a largely useless exercise, and which she continued anyway, because her mind had decided this was how the morning was going to proceed, and negotiating with it at 5 in the morning was a battle she lacked the energy to win. She thought about what Isabella wanted from this tea. She had been thinking about it since Friday, since the letter arrived with its perfect penmanship and its carefully constructed warmth, and she had reached the same conclusion each time. Isabella Fairmont was a strategist. She did not extend invitations without purpose. She did not seek conversations she had not already partially scripted. The tea was reconnaissance, yes, but it was also something else. It was a test of Clara's nerve. An assessment of whether the woman who had stood beside a window and caught a duke's attention was in fact the kind of woman who could sustain that attention under pressure, or whether she would fracture at the first application of force. Isabella wanted to know if Clara could be broken. Clara intended to answer that question clearly. She arrived at the Fairmont townhouse at precisely 2 o'clock. Not early. Early communicated anxiety. Not late communicated either power or disorganization, and she wished to communicate neither. She arrived at 2 o'clock exactly, was received by a housekeeper who led her through a hallway that communicated wealth with the particular restraint of people who had been wealthy long enough to stop needing to announce it, and was shown into a small bright sitting room where Isabella was already seated. Isabella rose when she entered. The smile she offered was warm and immediate, the smile of a woman genuinely pleased to see a friend, and it was so perfectly executed that for one fraction of a second Clara almost doubted her own assessment of the situation. Almost. Miss Whitmore, Isabella said, I am so glad you came. Thank you for the invitation, Clara said. They sat. Tea was already arranged. Isabella poured with the ease of a woman entirely at home in her own territory, which she was, and which was, Clara noted the point. I feel we have been at cross purposes. Isabella began, setting Clara's cup precisely before her. And I find that genuinely unfortunate. There is no reason for it. I agree, Clara said pleasantly. Cross purposes are rarely productive. Exactly. Isabella settled back. I want to be honest with you. May I be honest? I would prefer it, Clara said. I have known Adrian the Duke for some years. Our families have a long connection." She said this carefully, choosing each word with the attention of someone laying stones across a river. "I care about his well-being, and when I see a situation developing that I believe may not serve his best interests, I find it difficult to remain silent." Clara looked at her steadily. "What situation are you concerned about?" "Only that he has been away a very long time," Isabella said. "The campaign's changed him. Anyone who knew him before can see it. He returned different, more isolated. More likely, I think, to make decisions quickly, that he might with more time and perspective make differently." She paused. "I would hate for anyone to find themselves in a position built on the impulse of a difficult re-entry rather than on something more lasting." The room was very quiet. Clara took a sip of tea. She set the cup down. She looked at Isabella Fairmont, at the precision of her, the intelligence behind the warmth, the careful architecture of concern that had been constructed to communicate sympathy while delivering a warning, and she felt perfectly clearly the shape of the thing being offered. He chose you in a moment of weakness. It will not last. Step back now while you still can before you are the one who is embarrassed. That is a kind concern, Clara said. I mean it as such. I'm sure you do. Clara folded her hands in her lap. May I be honest with you in return? Something shifted very slightly in Isabella's expression. Of course. I think you are a remarkable woman, Clara said. I mean that without irony. You are intelligent and capable, and you understand the social landscape of this city better than almost anyone I have observed. Those are genuine qualities. She paused. And I think you have been waiting for 2 years for something you believe is yours by right, and watching that thing move in a direction you did not anticipate has been genuinely painful. I am not dismissing that. Isabella had gone very still. But, Clara continued in the same even tone, I am not going to step aside because you have framed my remaining as a risk to his well-being, because that framing has nothing to do with his well-being, and both of us know it. She held Isabella's gaze. He is not a man recovering from confusion. He is not a man making impulsive decisions. He is a man who has survived experiences that most people in this city cannot imagine, and who has come home and made a very deliberate choice to spend his attention on something real. She paused. I intend to honor that by continuing to be exactly what attracted his attention in the first place, which is someone who does not manage him. The silence stretched. Isabella looked at her. Not with the warmth anymore. That had been set aside finally, the performance of it no longer required, and what was underneath was something more real. Not cruelty, not malice, but something colder and more honest. The expression of a woman who had calculated something carefully and arrived at the unwelcome conclusion that her calculation had not accounted for a variable she had underestimated. You are not what I expected, Isabella said finally. I know, Clara said. I am frequently not what people expect. Another silence. Then Isabella said very quietly, almost to herself, he's not going to stop. No, Clara agreed. I don't think he is. Isabella looked at her teacup. Something moved across her face that was not the performance. It was briefer and rawer, and it was... Clara thought the actual person inside the strategy, a woman who had wanted something for a long time, and was in this particular sitting room finally accepting that wanting it was not going to be enough. I was unkind to you, Isabella said. The things I said to people. Eleanor, she stopped. Yes, Clara said simply. I will not say it was nothing. Isabella lifted her chin very slightly. But I will not continue. Whatever happens, I will not continue. It was not an apology. It was something more complicated than an apology. A recognition, a withdrawal, the closing of a campaign that had been decided. Clara received it for what it was. Thank you, she said. She stayed for 20 more minutes. They spoke of other things carefully, without depth, the way people speak after a significant conversation, when the significant part is finished and the ordinary world needs to be re-established. When Clara rose to leave, Isabella walked her to the hall with perfect courtesy. At the door she stopped. Miss Whitmore, she said. Clara turned. He missed half a step, Isabella said. When you said something to him at the Harrington ball, I was close enough to see it. I have known him for 8 years, and I have never once seen him miss a step. She held Clara's gaze. I thought you should know that I noticed. Clara looked at her for a moment. Thank you, she said again. She walked out into the April air and stood on the Fairmont front steps for 30 seconds breathing. Then she walked home. She arrived to find a carriage outside Whitmore House that she recognized, not Adrian's carriage, which she had now seen twice, but a different one older, with markings she did not immediately place. The front door was open. She could hear voices inside. She went in. The housekeeper appeared immediately with the expression of someone managing a situation. Miss Clara, she said. You have a visitor, Lady Harrington. She has been here 20 minutes and has asked twice whether you are expected home. Clara handed off her coat and went to the drawing room. Lady Harrington was seated with Clara's mother, and they were drinking tea with the specific tension of two women who knew each other well enough to maintain complete surface pleasantness over whatever was actually happening beneath it. Lady Harrington was 63, had been navigating London society since before Clara was born, and possessed the quality of permanent alertness that came from decades of paying attention to things other people chose to overlook. Miss Whitmore, she said when Clara appeared. Good. Sit down, please. I have something to tell you, and I would prefer to only tell it once. Clara sat. Her mother watched her with an expression that communicated, I do not know what this is, and I am not pleased about not knowing. Lady Harrington set down her cup. I have heard, she said, what has been said about you these past weeks. I want you to know that I am aware of the origin and the mechanism of those rumors, and I want you to know that I told Lord Harrington this morning over breakfast exactly what I thought of it. She paused. He agreed with me, which he generally does, when I am correct, which is most of the time. Clara looked at her. Lady Harrington, I am not finished. The older woman held up a hand. I am telling you this because I was the hostess of the evening where this all began, which means that whatever happens in the social conversations flowing from that evening reflects at least in part on my house. And I do not permit my house to be used as the starting point for the systematic diminishment of a woman who did nothing except be noticed by a man she did not arrange to be noticed by. She said this with the complete authority of a woman who had spent 60 years earning the right to say things this clearly. Is that understood? Yes, Clara said. Thank you. Furthermore, Lady Harrington continued, I have spoken with the Duke. Clara went still. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. He came to see Lord Harrington 2 days ago on a matter related to the estate. They have some shared business interests, older connections. While he was there, he mentioned not at length, not with drama, but clearly that his intentions regarding you are serious, and that he would take it as a personal discourtesy to Lord Harrington and myself if the social climate surrounding your name did not improve. Lady Harrington looked at her with sharp, interested eyes. He did not ask. He mentioned. You understand the distinction. Clara understood the distinction perfectly. An asking could be weighed. A mentioning from a man in his position to Lord Harrington carried the full weight of the title behind it without requiring it to be stated. He did that, Clara said. He did. Without telling me. Apparently without telling you. Lady Harrington tilted her head. Does that disturb you? Clara thought about it honestly. No, she said. It would disturb me if he had done it instead of speaking to me. But he did not do it instead. He did it alongside. She paused. It feels like someone watching your back, not someone taking your place. Lady Harrington looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said. That is a precise distinction. And you are right. She stood smoothing her dress with the practiced motion of a woman who had been smoothing dresses after difficult conversations for 40 years. I believe the climate will improve. I have seen to certain parts of it personally, but the rest depends on you continuing to be exactly what you have apparently been, which is by all accounts entirely yourself. She looked at Clara with an expression that was direct and warm, and underneath both deeply approving. Don't stop, Lady Harrington said simply. After she left, the drawing room was very quiet. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and let the fullness of the last 4 hours settle through her, the tea with Isabella. The withdrawal, not warm, not generous, but real. The sitting room and the admission about the half-step. And now this. Adrian speaking to Lord Harrington. Not announcing, not demanding. Simply placing his name beside hers, in a room where it counted, and letting the weight of it do what it would. Clara. She looked up. Her mother was watching her from across the room. He went to Lord Harrington, Lady Margaret said. Yes. Before he said anything to you about it. Yes. Her mother was quiet for a moment. He is protecting you. He is, Clara said. Lady Margaret looked at her hands. She was doing the thing she did when she was processing something that did not fit the categories she had prepared for it. A slight tightening around the eyes. A stillness in her usually composed posture. The expression of a woman whose architecture is being very quietly rearranged. I said something to you, Lady Margaret said finally. In the hallway of the Harrington estate, before the ball. You have said many things to me, Clara said carefully. That specific night. Her mother looked up. I told you to step aside. I held your wrist. She said that without looking away. I have been thinking about that since Thursday, since he sat in this room and told me you required no apology. I have been thinking about it for 5 days. The room was so quiet Clara could hear the street outside. I was wrong, Lady Margaret said. 3 words. Straightforward. No qualifications around them. No softening architecture. Just the 3 words standing alone in the room, without anything to lean against. Clara felt something shift in her chest, not a wave, not a collapse, but the specific sensation of a weight she had been holding for a long time being set down. The abruptness of the lightness was almost disorienting. Mother, I will not make a production of it, Lady Margaret said, with the particular dignity of a woman who could acknowledge error without being destroyed by it. But I want you to know that I understand what I did, and I understand why it was wrong, and I... She paused. The pause had something in it that was unusual, something unguarded. I am sorry, Clara. Clara looked at her mother. She thought about the wrist, the Tuesday mornings, the 6 years of curtain-adjacent positions in ballrooms, the 1,000 small redirections that had added up over time to a woman who had learned to make herself small and then wondered why she felt invisible. She thought about all of it, and she thought about the woman sitting across from her who had delivered all of it with complete genuine belief that she was being practical, that she was being helpful, that she was protecting her daughter from a world that was brutal about these things, which it was. The world was brutal about these things, and the brutality had simply entered Lady Margaret Whitmore through a door she had left open. I know, Clara said quietly. I believe you. Her mother pressed her lips together for a moment. He is going to ask you, Lady Margaret said. I believe it will be soon. And I want you to know when he does that you have my full support, without conditions. Clara breathed in and out. Thank you, she said. Her mother nodded once stood and left the room with the composure of a woman who had done something difficult and was not going to diminish it by continuing to talk about it. Clara sat alone. She sat for a long time. She thought 3 weeks ago I was standing at a window at the Harrington ball, wishing I had brought a book. She almost laughed. She didn't quite. The letter from Adrian arrived the following morning. It was brief, which she had come to understand was simply how he communicated. He used exactly the words he needed and trusted the recipient to understand that brevity was not absence. Clara, I would like to take you driving on Thursday if you are willing. There is something I want to say to you that I would prefer to say without an audience. She wrote back. Thursday is agreeable. C. She spent Wednesday in a state she declined to characterize to anyone including herself. Thursday arrived. He collected her at 10 in the morning. Her mother appeared at the top of the stairs as Clara pulled on her gloves, said nothing, and gave a single nod that communicated approximately 1,000 words. Clara nodded back. They drove. I took them out of the central city, through streets that thinned and opened, as the dense social geography of Mayfair gave way to something more spacious. She did not ask where they were going. He drove with the focused economy of a man who knew where he was going, and did not require commentary on the process. After 20 minutes, he stopped at a point overlooking a broad stretch of open land. He turned to look at her. I want to tell you something, he said. And I want to tell you before anything else happens, before we go further in any direction, Because it matters, and I need you to hear it from me directly, not from any other version of it that might reach you. Clara held his gaze. Tell me. I was not looking for a wife when I came home. He said it plainly without any cushioning around it. I want to be precise about this. My solicitor had advised it. My family had expected it. Society had been waiting for it since before my return. But I was not looking. I had come home to an estate in a worse condition than I had admitted to anyone, and I had arrived with the very real private belief that I was not ready for any of it. But you came to the ball, she said, because Lord Harrington is an old friend of the family, and I owed him the attendance, and because I thought I could manage an evening, be present, satisfy the requirement. His jaw tightened slightly. And then I walked into that room, and it was everything I expected it to be. And I began the evening of performance I had prepared for, and then... He stopped. Then, she said quietly. Then I looked across the room and saw a woman standing at a window, he said, who looked like she was thinking about something that had nothing to do with anyone in that room. And she looked... I cannot fully explain this. She looked like the only real thing in an entirely constructed space. Like something genuine that had wandered into the performance by accident. Clara breathed carefully. I watched you for 4 minutes before I crossed the room, he said. In 4 minutes you did not try to be noticed. You did not adjust your position. You did not look toward the door when you heard me arrive. You simply stood at your window and thought your own thoughts, and I... His voice dropped slightly, stripped of something. I could not remember the last time I had seen something that unperformed, that honest. I could not remember the last time being in a room full of people did not feel like something to survive. The silence around them was complete and clean. I need you to know, he said, that what I feel, what has developed in the past weeks, is not an impulse or a reaction or a decision made from isolation. I know myself well enough to know the difference. He looked at her directly. Clara, I am asking you to marry me. The world did not stop. There was no crash of sound or silence. The morning continued around them entirely indifferent to the enormous thing that had just been said inside it. Clara looked at the man across from her. She thought about a hallway and a wrist, and the words, step aside. She thought about a Tuesday woman crossing a street. She thought about Isabella Fairmont's sitting room, and her mother's face, and Lady Harrington's 3 words, don't stop. She thought about 6 years of windows and walls and bookshelves. She thought about what it had felt like at 26, to have moved through the world so quietly for so long, that she had nearly forgotten the sound of her own name, said with intention. She thought about a man who had walked across a room. Yes, she said. His exhale was brief and quiet and entirely real, the exhale of someone who had been holding something and set it down. Yes, she said again more firmly, with the full understanding of what I am walking into, the estate, and the work and the world that will watch us both and have opinions about every particular of it. Yes, because you are honest with me, because you do not apologize for me, because when I said something true to you at the Harrington ball you missed half a step, and I knew in that moment that you were real. She paused. And because I have spent 6 years waiting for someone to see me. I did not expect it to be the Duke of Ravenshire, but I am not in the habit of refusing true things because they are unexpected. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across and took her hand. Not the formal offering of a ballroom. Not the careful gesture of a man performing for an audience. Simply a hand closing around hers, with the warm, complete certainty of someone who had made a decision and was not seconding-guessing it. Neither am I, he said. They sat there in the open air with London behind them and everything ahead, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence between them was not empty. It was the fullest silence Clara had ever sat inside. She thought, I have been invisible for 6 years. She thought I am going to have to learn what it feels like to be seen. She thought with a clarity that surprised her with its simplicity, I think I am ready. The engagement was announced on a Friday, not through whispers. Not through the slow circulation of careful hints that society used when it wanted to communicate something while maintaining the appearance of not communicating it. Through a formal announcement in the Times, precise and unambiguous, the kind of announcement that existed specifically to remove all interpretive space from a situation. The Duke of Ravenshire, Adrian Blackwood, announces his engagement to Miss Clara Whitmore, daughter of Lady Margaret Whitmore of London. 11 words after the titles. 11 words that landed in London society like a stone dropped from a considerable height. Clara read it at breakfast with her tea going cold beside her, and her mother sitting across the table, not eating and not speaking, simply watching her daughter read the words with the expression of a woman who was still even now processing the full distance between what she had believed possible and what had actually occurred. "It is real," Clara said mostly to herself. "Yes," her mother said, "it is." They sat with that for a moment, the reality of it, the finality of the announcement, the way a thing that has been developing in the private space of possibility becomes an entirely different kind of thing when it is printed in 11 words in the morning paper. Then the letters started arriving. By noon there were 14. By 3 o'clock there were 31. They came from women she knew well, and women she barely knew, and women she had never spoken to, but who had apparently been watching her for years from the specific angle of people who watch things they do not expect to ever need to engage with directly. They came with congratulations that ranged from the genuine to the elaborately constructed, and Clara read each one with the careful attention of someone who had learned to distinguish between the two. Beatrice's letter arrived at 4 and contained no words at all, only a drawing small and quick of a woman standing at a window with a crown floating approximately 6 inches above her head, slightly tilted, which was so precisely Beatrice that Clara laughed for the first time all day fully and without management. She was still holding the letter when Adrian called. He arrived at 4:30, was received by her mother with the efficiency of a woman who had made a decision and was executing it completely, and came into the drawing room where Clara was sitting surrounded by a considerable volume of correspondence. He looked at the letters. He looked at her. "Are you all right?" "I am overwhelmed," she said, in a way that is entirely new to me and which I have not yet decided how to categorize. Overwhelmed positively or overwhelmed anxiously, she considered. Both, simultaneously. They appear to be coexisting. He sat across from her. "Tell me." So she told him the letters, the distinction between the genuine ones and the constructed ones. Beatrice's drawing the specific quality of her mother's silence. At breakfast, the way the announcement in print had made something that had been growing in the interior space of the last 3 weeks suddenly exterior and permanent and witnessed. He listened with the complete unhurried attention she had come to understand was simply how he listened, not waiting for the pause to insert his response, but actually receiving what she was saying, the way someone receives something they intend to keep. When she finished, he said, "What do you need? Not here is how we handle this. Not here is the plan." Simply the question, direct and genuine, the question of a man who understood that knowing what a person needed and assuming what they needed were two different things. She looked at him. "I need," she said slowly, "to go to Ravenshire. I need to see what I am actually walking into. Not the accounts, not the descriptions, the actual place, the actual people." She paused. "I need to know whether I can be useful there. Really useful. Not decorative, not present. Useful." He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to suggest the same thing," he said. "Next week, if you are willing. There are people on the estate I want you to meet before the wedding, and there are problems I want to show you, rather than simply describe to you." Yes, she said immediately. "Next week." He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued, now the specific one that appeared when she said something that aligned with what he had hoped she would say, but had not assumed. "Your mother will need to accompany you. For propriety." "My mother," Clara said, "will need to be asked rather than assumed." "Of course." He paused. "Will she come?" "Ask her yourself," Clara said. "She responds better to direct address than to being managed." The slight shift in his expression, almost a smile. "You know her well." "I have had 26 years of research." He went to speak with Lady Margaret. Clara sat with Beatrice's drawing and listened to the sound of a conversation happening in the next room between a duke and her mother, and thought about how strange and complete life could become in the space of 3 weeks, when you stopped standing at windows and started walking through doors." Her mother agreed to the visit. They arrived at Ravenshire on a Tuesday. The moment the carriage stopped before Clara had properly descended, a woman appeared. Not a housekeeper, not staff, but a village woman, stout and direct, wearing the practical clothes of someone who did physical work and did not apologize for it. She stopped in front of Adrian with the ease of someone who had known him since before he had a military record. "Your Grace," she said, "the north drainage is failing again. Mr. Hartley says it will take 3 weeks, and that amount he quoted last month." "Tell Hartley I will see him tomorrow morning at 7, Adrian said. "He won't like 7. "I know. Tell him anyway." The woman. Clara would learn her name was Mrs. Cole, wife of the head groundsman, a person of apparently considerable authority within the estate's daily operations, looked at Clara with the frank assessing gaze of someone who had watched several women arrive at Ravenshire over the years in various capacities and had developed clear opinions about what the estate required. "You're the one from London," Mrs. Cole said to Clara. "Yes," Clara said. "Heard you're not like what they usually send." Clara looked at her steadily. "What do they usually send?" "Pretty ones," Mrs. Cole said without hesitation. "Ones that look at the house and see the size of it and start thinking about what to put on the walls. We've had 4 of those come through in the last 8 years. None of them lasted the first winter." "What happened in the first winter?" Clara asked. Mrs. Cole looked at her with a slight considering shift in expression. "The roof leaked on the east wing. The tenants in Harrow Village needed the eastern road rebuilt, or their harvest wagons couldn't reach the market. 3 of the upstairs fireplaces needed relining, or someone was going to die of smoke. And the household accounts were in a state that would have made a grown man weep." She paused. 2 of the pretty ones left in November. 1 stayed until February and then had what her mother called a nervous collapse. 1 lasted the whole winter, but spent most of it in her room. She looked at Clara directly. "What would you have done?" Clara looked back at her with the same directness. "I would have started with the tenant road. Everything else is a house problem. The road is a people problem. People come first." Mrs. Cole was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Adrian. "I like her," she said simply, and walked back toward the house. Adrian looked at Clara. "That," he said quietly, "took most people significantly longer to accomplish." "I grew up managing a household that was also in disarray," Clara said. "In smaller ways. But the principles are the same." She paused. "Your east wing roof, is it still leaking?" "We repaired it in January," he said. "But the eastern drainage is genuinely failing, which is what Mrs. Cole was referencing, and which will affect 3 tenant farms if we don't address it before the autumn rains." "Show me," Clara said. They spent 4 days at Ravenshire. Clara had come prepared to be impressed by the scale of the problems. She was not prepared for the people. The estate was not simply a property in financial difficulty. It was an ecosystem, a web of lives and livelihoods and histories stretching back generations connected to the Blackwood family, not through sentiment, but through the fundamental dependency of people who had built their existence around the assumption that the estate would function. Tenants who had farmed the same land their fathers had farmed. Workers whose children worked alongside them. A village whose entire commercial structure was built around the rhythms and requirements of Ravenshire. She met them all. Not formally, not in the arranged manner of a visiting dignitary, being shown a representative sample. She asked Adrian to take her to the farms directly to the village, to the places where the actual daily reality of the estate lived. He did without comment or negotiation, simply adjusting the schedule of his own meetings to accommodate it. On the second day, she sat in the kitchen of a tenant farmer named Greer, while his wife served them both tea they could not actually afford, and talked for an hour about the drainage problem and the way 3 seasons of insufficient attention to the eastern fields had compounded into a crisis that managed poorly would ruin them. "What do you need?" Clara asked, "that you haven't been able to get?" Mrs. Greer looked at her husband. He looked at his cup. Then he said carefully, "Someone to listen, miss. Someone who understands that we're not asking for charity. We're asking for the estate to function the way it's supposed to function." Clara made notes. Actual notes in the small book she had brought, writing as he talked, asking specific questions, the kind of questions that required thinking about the problems from the inside rather than the outside. When they left, Adrian walked beside her in silence for a moment. Then he said, "You were taking notes." "Yes. Nobody has taken notes in that kitchen before." "I know," she said. "I could tell by the way he looked when I started. Like he was deciding whether to believe it was real." A pause. "Did you decide anything while you were in there?" he asked. "Several things." She flipped back through the notes. "The drainage work needs to begin immediately regardless of Hartley's timeline, which means you need a second contractor as leverage. The Greer farm needs a deferred rent arrangement for the next 2 seasons, while the soil recovers, which is not charity, it is investment. A functioning farm pays rent, and a failed one pays nothing. And someone needs to be meeting with the tenant farmers formally twice a year, at minimum receiving actual reports, because the problems that are crises now were small problems 3 years ago that nobody caught." Adrian looked at her. "All of that," he said, "is correct." "I know," she said, not with arrogance, but with the simple certainty of someone who has done the thinking and arrived at a conclusion they trust. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. "Clara," he said, "I need to tell you something that I should have said more directly before." She looked at him. The quality of his voice had shifted, not ominous but serious in the way that things are serious when they are important, and finally being said. "I am not a man who finds this easy," he said. "Any of it. The estate, the people, the weight of the responsibility. I came home from campaigns where the problems were defined. You identified a target, you achieved an objective, you measured the outcome. This." He gestured vaguely at the acres of complicated human reality surrounding them. "This is not defined. The outcomes take years. The problems are older than I am. And for the first 8 months after I returned, I sat inside this estate and felt—" He paused, looking for the word. "Insufficient." Clara waited. "And then I walked into a room," he said, "and saw a woman who was standing at a window thinking her own thoughts. And the thing that I felt, which I have been trying to find a precise word for since that night, was recognition." He met her eyes. "Like something I had been looking for in a language I didn't know I was searching in." The wind moved through the fields around them. Clara felt the fullness of it, the full weight and reality of where she was and what had been said, and who this man was. This complicated, careful, damaged and capable and profoundly real man who had walked across a ballroom because she had been the only person not performing. "I am also afraid," she said. "I want you to know that. I am not walking into this without fear. I am afraid of failing the estate. I am afraid of becoming somehow the person my mother always thought I was, not enough, not right, not suited for the space I am being offered." She held his gaze. "But I am more afraid of standing at another window. I am more afraid of choosing the safe, invisible place over the real one." She breathed. "So I am choosing real, even though it is frightening." He stepped forward and took both her hands. "We are going to fail at things," he said. "We are going to disagree. We are going to have winters that are worse than we expected, and problems we cannot solve as quickly as we need to, and people who will doubt both of us for our entire lives." His grip on her hands was steady and sure. "But we will not do it alone, and we will not do it dishonestly, and we will not do it from windows." Clara felt the laugh rise up in her, unexpected, genuine, the kind that comes from a place that has been held closed for a long time and is finally open. "No," she agreed. "Not from windows." They were married in June. Not grand event in the way that London society generally defined grand. Not the spectacle of the season. Not the social performance of the year. They had discussed it once directly and reached immediate agreement, real not large. Meaningful, not theatrical. The church was filled with people who actually knew them. Beatrice sat in the front row and cried from the moment Clara appeared in the doorway, which she had predicted she would do, and which she accomplished with her characteristic wholehearted commitment. Lady Margaret sat beside her with the composure of a woman managing a significant quantity of emotion through the application of posture, and only someone who knew her as well as Clara did would have noticed the single moment when the words were said and the thing was done, and her daughter became the Duchess of Ravenshire, when Lady Margaret Whitmore pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. Mrs. Cole attended and stood in the back and told the woman beside her at a volume that was not quite private that she had known from the first day that this one was different. They returned to Ravenshire that afternoon. The estate work began immediately, not after a honeymoon, not after a season of adjustment, but immediately because the drainage problem did not pause for personal milestones, and the Greer farm needed the deferred rent arrangement formalized before the month ended. Clara sat across from the estate solicitor the morning after their return and went through the accounts with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting for access to this particular problem and intended to make use of it. The solicitor was a man of 50 who had managed the Ravenshire accounts for 12 years and who had in that time worked with 3 women who had passed through the estate and found all 3 decorative and largely uninvolved. He brought Clara a summary document in the manner of someone presenting a simplified version to someone who would not read the full version. She set it aside and asked for the full ledgers. He blinked. "All of them," he said. "All of them," she said. "From the last 5 years." He brought them. She spent 4 hours with them that afternoon and another 3 the following morning, making notes in her small book, mapping the pattern of decisions that had compounded over years into the current state of the estate, identifying not just the problems, but the logic that had created them. Decisions made not with malice, but with the short-term thinking of people who had not been required to consider the long-term. By the end of the second day, she had a document of her own 12 pages, organized clearly, identifying 7 areas of immediate concern in order of urgency, with proposed approaches to each. She brought it to Adrian that evening. He read it. The entire 12 pages without skimming, without the impatient speed of someone getting through something they expected to have views on before finishing. He read it the way he listened completely. When he finished, he looked up at her. "The Greer drainage approach," he said. "You have suggested involving the Greer farm and the 2 adjacent farms in the solution, rather than addressing it from the estate side alone. Because they have 20 years of knowledge about how the water moves in those fields that no contractor has," Clara said. "Use what you have. The knowledge is already there. And the household accounts you want to restructure the quarterly reporting. Monthly," she said. "Quarterly is too slow. Problems that are visible in month 2 become crises by month 6. He set the document down. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "Paying attention," she said simply. "For 26 years, to things people assumed I wasn't paying attention to because I was standing at windows." He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued, the one she would spend the rest of her life seeing in different contexts and different weights. The one that meant you are exactly what I thought you were, and somehow more. The first winter was hard. Clara had been warned, and Mrs. Cole had catalogued winters past, with the unflinching honesty of a woman who considered useful information more important than comfortable information. But knowing something intellectually and living it are 2 different experiences. And the first winter at Ravenshire was the kind of education that happens in the body and the decision-making nerve rather than in the mind. The east drainage failed worse than projected. The contractor negotiations collapsed in October, and they spent 3 weeks without a viable repair plan while the autumn rains began. Clara worked the solicitor problem and the contractor problem, simultaneously running 2 separate negotiations from the same desk, and learned that the Ravenshire tenants had been undercharged for certain contracted services for a decade because the previous management had been too conflict-averse to renegotiate, which meant there was money available that had not been appearing in the summaries. She found it on a Thursday afternoon in November, deep in a ledger from 4 years ago, a discrepancy so buried in routine accounting that it had apparently been invisible to everyone who had looked before. She brought it to Adrian at 8 o'clock at night, still in her working clothes, her hair coming loose from its arrangement, the ledger open in her arms. "Here," she said, setting it in front of him. He looked. He read. He looked up. "How long have you been looking for this?" 6 weeks, she said. "I knew something was wrong with the quarterly totals. I could feel it before I could find it." "This covers the drainage repair," he said. "This covers the drainage repair and the Harrow Road and 2 seasons of deferred tenant rent," she said, "with a small amount remaining." He stared at the ledger for a long moment, Then he looked at her standing in his study at 8 in the evening, with her hair half undone and a 4-year-old ledger in her arms, and the quiet, exact expression of a woman who had found what she was looking for, and what moved across his face was not gratitude, not even admiration, but something deeper and more specific. It was pride. "Come here," he said. She came around the desk. I took the ledger from her hands and set it aside, and took both her hands instead, the way he had taken them in the field in September, the same grip, steady and sure, and entirely certain of itself. "You found it," he said. "We needed it found," she said simply. "Clara." He looked at her directly. "I need you to hear something." She waited. "The people on this estate," he said slowly, "the tenants, the staff, Mrs. Cole, the Greers, they have started coming to you with things, problems, questions, requests. They come to me with the formal matters, and they come to you with the actual ones." He paused. "Do you know why?" "Tell me," she said. "Because they trust you." His voice was even and entirely serious. "Not because you are the Duchess. Not because of the title. Because in 6 months you have sat in their kitchens and taken notes in your little book and remembered their children's names and followed up on things you said you would follow up on. Because they have watched you work." He held her gaze. "You have earned something that the title alone cannot buy, and that I cannot give you, and that nobody in London last April would have believed was coming." Clara felt it move through her, the full weight of it. The specific, particular weight of being told by someone who did not say things casually that you had done something real. "They trust you," he said again. "And so do I. More than I have trusted anyone in a very long time." The winter light was low, and the fire was burning, and there was a 4-year-old ledger on the desk with 12 pages of answers in it, and Clara Whitmore, Clara Blackwood, Duchess of Ravenshire, stood in her husband's study, and felt with complete and unmanaged clarity what it felt like to be exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because she had become someone different. Not because she had learned to stand in the center of rooms, or compete for attention, or perform the version of herself that society had always told her she needed to perform. Because she had remained entirely, stubbornly, completely herself. And that December, when the drainage repairs were completed, and the Harrow Road was rebuilt, and the Greer farm signed a 2-season deferred rent arrangement that both parties understood was an investment and not a charity. Mrs. Cole appeared in the doorway of Clara's study. Not the formal drawing room. Her actual working study. The one with the ledgers and the notes and the small book with 6 months of observations in it, and said without preamble, "The village is asking if you'll come to the Christmas gathering this year. They want you to come not because you're the Duchess, because you're you." Clara looked up from the ledger. She thought about a woman standing at a window in April, wishing she had brought a book. She thought about a mother's hand on a wrist. She thought about a ballroom and a crossing and a half-step missed. She thought about Isabella Fairmont's perfect sitting room and Monday tea and the admission about the half-step that had meant more than any social negotiation. She thought about 4 days at Ravenshire in September and 12 pages of notes and a Thursday evening in November with her hair coming loose. She thought about every room she had ever made herself small in. She thought about the specific, uncomplicated joy of no longer doing that. "Tell them yes," she said to Mrs. Cole. "Tell them I would not miss it." Mrs. Cole nodded and left, and Clara turned back to the ledger, and outside the Ravenshire winter continued with complete indifference to the human story unfolding inside it, and inside that story. A woman who had once been told she would never be chosen had built something that no one had chosen for her. She had built it herself. With her own hands and her own mind and her own stubborn, unperforming, window-standing self. She had not been chosen because she became what the world required. She had been found because she refused to. And that all of it, the whole complicated, hard-won, improbable length of it, was entirely finally enough.